Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I am here with the wonderful Elwin Robinson, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. And thank you, lovely listeners. Again, it's always wonderful to be with you and to bring you these episodes. And we are so happy you have such inquisitive minds. So keep talking to us, keep joining us. We love having you here. So just so you guys know, some of you may be new. This episode is part of a series that Elwin and I thought would be really great of looking at the Rejuvenate Blueprint, which is identifying the 7 root causes of chronic disease as a practitioner could utilize this for their clients. So it really is a quick kind of how-to of looking at those 7 steps and how you can utilize them. So right now, this is part 2 of the second step. So if you've missed any previous episodes, please make sure to check them out. I'll do my best to put the links below, but also it helps if you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss them. And so this is part 2 of deficiencies. In the previous episode, we were looking at it more from a macro point of view, and today we are looking at certain deficiencies and the importance of certain micronutrients specifically. So Elwin, I'm going to pack it over here to you. Last time we were looking at the macros, here we're looking at the micros. Is one more important than the other, or do they have the same how can I say, weight?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, a question I do get sometimes is what is the most important nutrient, or what are the most important nutrients to focus on? And of course, the problem is the tricky answer that most people won't tell you because it's just more difficult is it depends what you need, right? So the most important nutrient is the one that you need the most. Now you could say, okay, well, oxygen's the most important nutrient because you'll die for a few minutes if you don't have it. So yeah, okay, in that case, that's the one you need the most then, right? But for instance, if you have, a mild lack of oxygen like anemia, you can technically survive for decades with that. Whereas a deficiency of something much more obscure, like vitamin B3 or something, could be causing you really, a much more serious problem, and you may not even realize it. So, the one that you need the most, the one that's the most important is the one that you need the most. And so everyone's got their favorites. So if you talk to a lot of practitioners these days, it's, they focus on magnesium, they focus on vitamin D3, they focus on, maybe B12. Some of them are obsessed with copper or, zinc or whatever. Okay, all of these are fair, and all of these are sometimes really important. But one of the key sayings that we incorporate here in the Rejuvenate podcast and as part of the Rejuvenate Blueprint is test, don't guess. And so, yes, you can sometimes know what people need more of, or be able to make a decent enough educated guess based on symptomology. But the problem is that the symptoms of low levels of most of the important nutrients are the same as dozens or hundreds of other diseases, because when the more that a nutrient is universally important and beneficial, like zinc or magnesium, the more ways that it could, like a deficiency or a suboptimal level. I explained in the beginning of the last episode that when I'm talking about deficiencies, I'm not necessarily talking about a medical level of lack. I'm just talking about a suboptimal level. So those can show up in so many different ways for different people. And often they just show up as lack of energy, and then how that lack of energy shows up depends totally on the person. So the person might have no lack of energy, as in they're charging around 20 hours a day, but it shows up for someone as allergies. It shows up for the other person as skin issues. It shows up for another person as a fungal infection. It shows up for another person as frequent respiratory infection. It shows up for another person as depression. It shows up for another person as gaining weight and not being able to lose weight. It shows up for a different person as losing weight and not being able to gain weight. Like, there's so many different ways that like a basic lack of metabolic function and mitochondrial energy can show up for people. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, why very hard science MDs often hate this area and don't really focus on it. It's partly they're not trained in it, which is something that's coming out in the mainstream more and more now, how MDs just aren't trained in nutrition. And in fact, if you watch this whole series, you'll have done probably the same amount or more hours of training in nutrition as most MDs. That's how little training they get on it. But it's also that it's very imprecise, right? Like doctors like very specific extreme symptom in a very specific area of the body, maybe a couple with a very specific, often very, obvious cause, like a massive, internal bleeding or a massive elevation of something in the test results or something like that. That's very, very clear and obvious. So when there's subtle, chronic, but not emergency levels of all kinds of issues, there's so many different things it could be, and it could be any of dozens of different nutrient deficiencies, and it could be any number of toxin excesses, and it could be any number of hormonal imbalances. And so this is where the vagueness of it is often where the kind of mainstream medical doctors lose interest, because the impact on your life is rarely life-threatening and very serious. It just significantly reduces the quality of your life, and long-term slowly can lead to very serious diseases, but not in an obvious way that can be graphed, in a one-to-one correlation, which is what they're looking for. And so, but I know that there are MDs watching this, and I know that there are a bunch of other practitioners watching this who are like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Elwin, and I want to know more about it. So of course, that's what we're here to do right now. So yeah, first thing, there are a few nutrients that it's pretty safe to give almost anyone, because excesses of it are very unusual and very unlikely. And so today, I think we're not going to talk massively about we'll probably talk a little bit, but we won't not talk massively about the macros: protein, fat, carbohydrate, because we already did that in the last episode. We're not going to talk about hydration, because we did that in the last episode. And we're not going to go into too much about electrolytes, because we did that in the last episode, but we are going to talk a bit about some of them as more minerals rather than electrolytes, like magnesium, for instance. So yeah, so magnesium is an example of something you can get someone to supplement with 1, 2, 3 capsules a day, and it's almost never going to be excessive. And so if you're a practitioner who routinely recommends magnesium to people, fair enough. That's rarely an issue. I'm trying to think if there's any other minerals that are universally not an issue. I think probably not. Iron in women who have all the obvious signs of low iron and heavy flow, but then again, it's so easy to check for iron status. The test is readily available and very cheap that I would still just test. And arguably zinc for men who have been on a vegetarian diet for a long time maybe could be another category of, okay, just recommend it to them, don't test for it. I know a lot of people would say like a little bit of omega-3, EPA and DHA for most people, because most people are eating a standard diet with very large amounts of omega-6 to omega-3. So that would be an example of something that practitioners often just recommend without any evidence that it's needed. And then in the case of vitamins, there's definitely more that are safe. And so there's 2 categories of vitamins. There's fat soluble and water soluble, and the fat soluble ones are, with one exception, very dubious to just recommend to people, I would say, because they
because they I was going to say, because that's because they accumulate in our body, correct?
Absolutely. And they are not excreted quickly. They're excreted very slowly. So it's very easy to...
I was going to say, and as you've referred to in the past, it's the dosage. It's like one bit it's medicine, and then the next bit it's poison. It's potentially toxic to the body, correct?
100%. It can easily get excessive. And the problem is it's not easy to test via any test, including the type that we're going to go through today. The only real way you can test for fat soluble vitamin accumulation is via biopsy, and especially in the organs where it tends to accumulate. Like the liver being a prime one, but kidneys, maybe brain. No one wants to do a biopsy of those things.
Nobody. It's a little extreme.
So it's really hard to tell, and that's why you do see. I follow a community of people who are all trying to reduce their levels of vitamin A, and again, I see people having the same experience that I did, which They go zero or close to zero vitamin A in foods. They test, before they go or as they go, and then they test again 6 months later, 12 months later, and the vitamin A in their blood has actually gone up. So I see this over and over again. In fact, I've seen that. I don't think I've ever seen it where someone just stops and their level just goes down, because as you stop, the levels that have accumulated in the fatty tissues in general, and in some of the organs like the liver and the kidneys specifically, it does go into the bloodstream from where it's been accumulated. And it's significant how much is accumulated in most people. So that's definitely true for vitamin A. There's hundreds of studies about the toxic effects of an excess of accumulation of vitamin A. So this, I think, it's the most researched of all nutrients. It's the first discovered of all nutrients, hence the first letter of the alphabet was named after it. Nutrients, well, vitamins anyway, vitamins. Vitamin A is potentially a problem. Vitamin D3 is potentially a problem. Unlike vitamin A, vitamin D3 is absolutely beloved by not just a decent amount of mainstream medical practitioners, but a lot of alternative people as well. Almost everyone agrees that vitamin D is great and that people should routinely be supplementing it. The argument is quite compelling on the surface because we're supposed to get it from the sun, and almost no one gets enough sun these days. Even if you're in a sunny climate, most people don't. They don't live outdoors, and even some of the ones who do, they cover themselves in high SPF sun cream all day. There's a very, very small minority of people these days who are out in the sun most of the day, most days, who are not covered in sun cream and not, blocking those UVB rays that actually stimulate vitamin D production. So on the surface, it is very compelling, actually, that we all need some vitamin D supplementation. And I'm not against it. I had some debates about this in the comments section of, obviously we've had guests on who talk about the extreme danger of excess amounts, and I don't disagree. It is a thing that's considered to be life-threatening in sufficient level of excess, which is possible with supplementation. It is certainly something which is considered to be toxic in excess. And in excess is not in any way impossible level to reach by the supplements that are routinely available from places. And so I understand that perspective, but I've also seen people who are extremely unwell who get given a very high dose and feel a hell of a lot better. And some people say, oh, that's because it's blocking detoxification or something. Well, okay, but it was, it saved them, it rescued them from an acute, potentially life-threatening infection. We have to be realistic here about what's going on. So anyway, I'm not against it totally, and I think it's case by case, but I'm not a fan of anything other than very low dose vitamin D3 supplementation being given to people unless you test. And also because I see a wide variation, which genetics plays a significant part in the utilization of those supplements. Meaning, I've seen some people who take very high doses for a long time and their test results still show that they're low and they still have the symptoms of being low, and then other people who take a very moderate dose who then end up with high levels in their blood. So there seems to be a big variation. In fact, that partly correlates with vitamin A. So vitamin A is antagonistic to vitamin D. And so if you have high levels of vitamin A, that's one of the reasons why you might have problems with assimilating vitamin D no matter how much you take. But there's definitely other factors as well, like magnesium and calcium and other stuff.
Yeah, you bring up a really, really good point, because even though you may be taking it in, it doesn't necessarily mean that your body is absorbing it or utilizing it effectively.
Yeah. And, vitamin D, we have to understand one of the main reasons why it's dangerous, potentially, but also important, is because it increases the absorption of calcium. So we have to understand.
And how does that, I was going to say, how does that interplay potentially in a negative aspect for us?
It's a good question. I'll answer that first. Because we want calcium in certain places. We want it inside cells. We want it very concentrated in the skeleton. We want it in the teeth. We want, a certain level in other places like the blood. But generally, too much calcium is a significant problem. And in fact, through one lens, it's accurate to say that the process of aging is simply the process of calcification. If you look at someone who's very young and very old, one of the things that you'll see is that they've kind of dried up as they get old, like a prune, shriveled up. And so there's a few different mechanisms at play there, but one significant one is like that their tissues are calcified the older that they get. And so calcium is a very drying substance. We talked about that last time. Hard water, right, has a kind of dry quality to it, even though it's water. And so calcium is a very drying substance, and so excess levels of it basically, and then that's the, I guess, global consequences, but specifically, so calcium buildup in the liver and gallbladder we call gallstones, liver stones. Calcium buildup in the kidneys we call kidney stones. Calcium buildup in the arteries we call arterial plaque. Calcium buildup in the brain we refer to as amyloid plaque, which can lead to things like Alzheimer's. And I could go on, but basically there's loads of things where you don't want calcium building up. And it's not calcium on its own, it's always calcium with something else, but it's still not something that we want building up in tissues, basically. We want it in the bones. We want, the correct level in tissues, but we rarely have deficiency in tissues. It's either the right amount or it's an excess. And so vitamin D3 does pull more D3 in it. And this is the thing I was going to say before. We have to understand that when we look at a nutrient, magnesium, zinc, calcium, or whatever, and we get given a recommended daily allowance or recommended daily intake figure, like, this is the amount you need, right? Not all of it is going to be absorbed. So often it's, like 10%, 20%, 50% that they actually expect is going to be absorbed. So if they say, that you need 15 milligrams of zinc a day or 10 milligrams of iron or something like that, what they're expecting is that a certain small percentage of that is actually going to be absorbed, and that will be what you need, if that makes sense. So don't think that's the bottom line of what I'm saying here, that 100% of every nutrient you absorb, 100% of every nutrient you consume, you would expect to be absorbed. That's not the case. And in the case of calcium, quite a small percentage is absorbed, but that does increase or reduce in relation to your level of vitamin D3 in your blood. It makes, a significant difference. And so the higher your vitamin D3 in your blood, which again could come from sun or oral intake, the more percentage of calcium you will actually absorb from your food. And so obviously it's not a bad thing if you need that calcium, but obviously it could be a bad thing if you don't need that calcium, if it's like excessive. But the issue, as far as I have been able to make out, and I say there is not a consensus about this, it's not really actually that there's just an excess of total calcium in the body. It's more that it brings it to the wrong place. And that's why generally people who are a little bit more sophisticated with vitamin D3, they say don't have it on its own, but have it along with K2, vitamin K2. And so the idea being that the D3 will increase the absorption of calcium. And yes, it will pull it into the blood and pull it into the tissues. But then the K2 is the theory, will then take it and put it where it's meant to be, mainly in the bones. And so I think that's accurate to some degree. Again, it's argued how effective that mechanism is. I'm quite a fan of like very high dose vitamin K2 if you want to correct that excessive tissue calcification, especially arterial calcification. And if we skip ahead to K2 for a second, K2 is the one fat soluble vitamin that I think they haven't found a toxic level on in any dose that is feasible for you to get from supplementation anyway. I mean, I'm sure if you took a kilo, it would be a problem, but there's tiny quantities in supplements, and anything they've tested, it has not been toxic and dangerous.
That's good. And so are you saying that if somebody has overcalcification in their tissues, that by supplementing with K2 could help reverse that?
Yes. Now, the only thing that's a question is, how effective it is, what scale it actually works. Is it, a needle in a haystack, or is it really making a significant difference? But yeah, if you use a form of K2, which we don't sell, but it's in our store, but because it's kind of specific purpose, but it's called MK4. There's several studies, I think in Japan, that show very large dosages of that can be effective at reducing that coronary artery score of calcium. Sorry, the calcium score, and we're talking about like something like 15 to 45 milligrams a day, which is loads in the case of K2. But the studies where people did that higher dose for several years, it was effective. There were no significant side effects. And so, yes, that is often something that I recommend to people who are concerned about arterial calcification. Say, well, that's kind of a first step because it's safer than all the other drugs. And it, it has been shown to be effective. In Japan, they actually sell it as a drug, I think. It's licensed as a pharmaceutical because it's been shown to be sufficiently effective. But it's only in maybe South Korea, but it's only in a couple of countries in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, not like throughout the rest of the world. So that's K2, and then vitamin E. Vitamin E is something you can easily overdo as well. If you look at like really, really mainstream news articles about vitamins, they're often against it, right? And they often use like studies showing, oh, you have too much vitamins, it's actually bad for you. And if you look into it, it's usually actually talking about vitamin A or vitamin E specifically. So vitamin E is an antioxidant. It does have some benefits. I won't argue with that, but it's easy potentially to get too much. And so I would have some caution around vitamin E as well, and only use it for specific purposes. Like it can be effective for lowering prolactin, for instance. So that's something, like you might have a higher dose for a while because of that. I know some people in our community love it because it can help protect from the damage of inflammatory fats, like omega-6 fats. So, and in nature, omega-6 fats usually come with some vitamin E, so maybe there's something to that. So that would be a reason potentially to have vitamin E to protect you against the damaging inflammatory effects. Again, it's an antioxidant, but it seems to be specifically like helping to protect those fats from being oxidized. And that's something we'll look at soon when we look at examples of people's test results. So yeah, let me buzz through them. So other than that, there's the B vitamins, which I've talked through a lot. I am a fan in most cases. They're all water soluble. With most of them, there is no concern with people having excess, but it's not quite as simple as that. So very sensitive people do often have issues with several of them. B1, some people can react to, especially the sulfurous, because it has a sulfurous element to it in like high doses, like you find in supplements, not really the amount that you find in food. B2, I've seen, it's sold in supplements as high as 400 milligrams. I've seen people talk about how that has been really excessive and messed them up. But I think like a normal amount that you find in supplements, like 25, 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams even, is fine. I haven't seen any evidence that causes problems in people if they have that much. B3, if it is the kind of real B3 version, nicotinic acid can absolutely create a histamine reaction in people, or something that looks like a histamine reaction, whether it's called a niacin flush. People get red, prickly, all the blood goes to the surface of their body, so they feel very warm, and then after a period of time, it then does the opposite and goes back to the core, and then they feel very cold. And so that can be potentially problematic. B5 is pretty safe in any dose. B6 can easily cause neuropathy in some people in levels that are not that crazy and which are often found in supplements. So that's something to be concerned about. B7, biotin, I've actually been experimenting with very high doses of this. It is
How long for and why, can I ask?
about a month, because no matter how much I took, it still showed I need more in my test results. And it's one of the things needed to create energy, and my mitochondria is still showing as lagging in that regard. So I thought it's worth the risk. But yes, exactly, I would not do it just for the sake of it. And that is what I was going to warn about. Like people often do very high doses because it helps with skin, hair, and nails. I say very high doses. I'm talking about 10 milligrams. I haven't really been able to see any evidence except for anecdotal that it actually is a problem, which is why it is commonly sold in that amount. I've seen other people in my biohacking groups talking about having hundreds of milligrams a day and feeling fantastic, like feeling that it really helps them. So I think there is a very wide margin there, and biotin is not considered something that you can overdose in any kind of sane level. But I would still be a little bit concerned about having very, very high doses, even if it's not toxic, just because it can maybe imbalance other stuff if you have it on its own. There's folate. Folate, if you have just folic acid, this is kind of not good. It will take up the folate receptor and not actually utilize it correctly. So folic acid is the cheap form that is often in the cheapest supplements and added to food, and it's really bad news. It doesn't do the job of folate, and it blocks the receptor that folate would be able to use. So I would recommend making sure that if you recommend a B complex to someone, to make sure it has either some form of folate or folinic acid, otherwise known as calcium folinate, but not just folic acid. Basically, folic acid is not a good type. And then, there's B12, which there's several different forms of. Now, both B12 and folate commonly come in a form that's methylated. It will say methyl something. I think folate is methyl tetrafolate, and then B12 is methylcobalamin. And although a mainstream doctor wouldn't really buy into this, again, anecdotally, a lot of people will feel worse of that. Like the methyl group will. There's a whole thing of methylation, which is quite complicated, which we don't necessarily want to go into, but it's a methyl donor, which may increase methylation, which if your methylation is slow, may start a process of detoxification that makes you feel worse. If your methylation is already too fast, then it'll make it even more fast. So it's not quite as simple as it seems. But I would say, however, most people that I see, and most stressed people, and most people with chronic health issues, are very deficient at least some B vitamins and do benefit from it. So I'm generally a fan of like a medium dose B complex to a lot of people, despite everything I just said. But just be aware, very sensitive people may still have an issue with it. And it's always better to do it based on actual testing than just giving out a general supplement. But sometimes that's not realistic, and it's so many people are just starving for B vitamins, like their body really needs it, and then a B complex is better than nothing.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, You'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. Yeah, I remember when we were looking at, when I first started talking to you about my health and things, and, one of the biggest factors was stress for me. I've just a very high level of stress, and what you informed me of is that if you do have high levels of stress or in a very, stressful job, you're going to burn through those B vitamins pretty fast.
Yep. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be bad stress. If you're an athlete, if you're a peak performer of one kind or another, basically, B vitamins are required for energy production and, specifically for the carbohydrate, although they're required for every type of energy production, but especially if a lot of your fuel comes from carbohydrate, you'll require more B vitamins that way. Which is one of the things that the keto people say to, as to why it's better to be ketogenic. It doesn't require as many B vitamins. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't even have to be negative stress. Just if you are not living a sedentary, boring life like the vast majority of our ancestors, right? Almost all of our ancestors were agrarian, plebeian, working hard, but very little variety, very little novelty, very little excitement in their lives. If you're not living like that, if you're traveling around the world, if you're, challenging yourself and getting outside your comfort zone and pushing, burning candle at both ends and all that kind of stuff, you're going to be burning through B vitamins. Ditto if you're utilizing any drugs. If you're utilizing stimulants, burning through B vitamins. Alcohol, burning through B vitamins. A bunch of other prescription drugs as well, burning through B vitamins. It's very common that people are low in it, Chrissy. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that as well too, which we, talk about, testing and having a look, which was evident on my NutrEval, which was like, oh, okay, interesting. Here we are. And then also too in my genetics, like have an increased need for vitamin B3 and things like that. So it just kind of all plays in, because even though, as you're talking and I'm thinking about it, it's like, this all sounds so complex. And what if I have too much of this? And should I even take that? Or maybe it sounds like I should take that. But if I take that, how's that going to affect other stuff? So you almost get to a point of where you go like, it's overwhelming to know exactly what the right next step is.
It is for the person, and that's why as a practitioner, it's really good to get on top of this stuff and actually be able to give them, proper guidance on it. Because, it's true that the average person, should eat a highly nutritious diet, which is what we'll be focusing on in part 3 of this, helping people to do that. And maybe supplementing with some magnesium, maybe some omega-3 if they're consuming a lot of omega-6s, maybe a bit of zinc if they're a man with low animal food diet, and maybe a B complex, right? That's like and also maybe a low dose vitamin D3 if they're hardly getting any sunlight without testing. So that's without everything I just said there is without testing. But it is far, far better to test. So in terms of what kind of test can you do? Well, the first port of call is to ask them if they have already had some test results and from a doctor, from an MD, and in there you might be able to find a couple of nutrients, right? So these days, some doctors test for vitamin D3, so you might be able to see that, and so that can give you some helpful guidelines. And of course, don't just base it purely on what the results say. Ask them questions like, were you taking a vitamin D3 supplement at the time, right? And have you been taking one since you took this test? Because obviously that will skew it. But that's something that comes up. Sometimes more commonly rather, there will be like iron or ferritin, and there will be B12 and folate reasonably commonly. And so that can give you some information. There was a client not that long ago who, they had a bunch of stuff going on, but they had severe B12 deficiency. And this was someone who had been working really hard to be healthy for a long time. They were not even vegetarian. They certainly weren't vegetarian. They weren't vegetarian, they weren't vegan, but they weren't eating a huge amount of meat because they were trying to be healthy. And for whatever reason, and of course, I think it's something like 60% of vegetarians are deficient in B12, but something like 30% of meat eaters are. So even eating meat reasonably regularly is no guarantee that you are going to have sufficient levels of B12. Anyway, this person was very deficient, and I was like, thank God, and they'd not really done testing before, and they come to me, and I was like, thank God you actually tested this at this stage, because a B12 deficiency is serious. I mean, every deficiency is serious, but one of the reasons why B12 is disturbing, and one of as far as I understand, the two main reasons they test it even in normal MD tests, number one is because it relates to anemia, which is obviously super important because that's the transport of oxygen by the red blood cells, which can easily be an emergency if it's not working correctly. So that's one of the reasons why they test it. But the other reason they test B12 is because once you get past a certain point of deficiency, it's very difficult, stroke impossible, depending on how far along it is to fix. And it is really bad what it does to you. It's like a breaking down of your whole nervous system over the course of years. It's something, similar-ish to Alzheimer's, like something like that. It's a really serious situation, and basically you can be quite far along and not really realize that that's what's going on with you, and you can get to the point where it's irreversible before someone picks up on it, basically. So it's a big deal. That's why it is tested for, and I strongly encourage, especially if a client is a vegetarian or vegan, but not only necessarily that, make sure that is tested for. Certainly it doesn't have to be done every 6 months or something, but at least every 5 years, something like that. Like if they've never tested for that, test them for that at least, because it's very important.
Yeah, I've never heard of this. The B12 is the only mineral vitamin that I've heard of that when you get beyond a certain point, then it is irreversible. So, I mean, that just goes to show you how instrumental it is into our health and our well-being.
Yeah. And obviously at a certain point before it's irreversible, it's still very difficult, and often that's where injections are necessary, and that's why B12 shots are not that uncommon. Like any hospital will have them available, a lot of doctors will have them available. So other than that, yeah. So those are kind of the ones. Oh, and then the other things that might show up if a person just shows up with standard doctor test results to show you would be some of the electrolytes. So potassium, calcium, magnesium, sodium, bicarbonate, calcium, let's say that. But chloride, I don't really pay attention to this because these are doctor levels, meaning these are just looking, they don't tell us anything about the person's reserves of those. They only tell what the balance of them is in the blood, which unfortunately only, if there's a disturbance, if there's some kind of heart attack or whatever, then that will all be messed up, and the doctors can use that to tell that, but that does not tell us anything. And even people who are very sick, often you see their doctors' results of those, and they're all within normal range. They're all totally fine. So that's fine, and that's good. That means that the person at the time that they that tested did not have those serious diseases attached to that, but it does not tell us, oh, therefore they're fine for magnesium. Oh, therefore they're fine for potassium. That only tells us that their body was capable of keeping those electrolytes within the normal range in their blood, which is not the same thing. So yeah, in terms of testing, there are various different tests out there. I'm a fan of the NutrEval. We've talked about it before. And in this episode, we're going to give, I think we've got 4 different people's results to share. Me, Chrissy, and a couple of anonymous people who've given permission. And we'll be looking at a few examples of what you might come across and what you can actually do about it. Before we get into that, I'll just speak to a couple of things that are not in the NutrEval. So one thing that's not in the NutrEval is iron. We just talked about that. It's a very important mineral. It's not in there, probably because it's in every standard medical test. Another thing that's not definitely included is vitamin D3. I think you have to ask for it. It is available, but it's like an extra. And maybe they've done it that way because it's an additional cost, and a lot of people already have it in their normal doctor medical results. And then another big one that's just not in there is iodine. And iodine is a tricky one. We may get to that or we may not. Because again, iodine, you can very easily overdo it with iodine. And so iodine is one of the very few that I would base a person's need on symptoms and also what they're having in their diet rather than test results. And yeah, different people have different tests on it, different opinions on it. as we talked about in a previous episode, the whole skin test is completely inaccurate and unhelpful. And I would encourage every practitioner to look into the origin story of that test, where it comes from, and the level of credibility that it really has. So, should we start looking at people's results?
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, this is when I first did my first ever NutrEval, and thank you for introducing me to it. I loved it because it helped me go, even though it just kind of helped give me an insight, or not help, it did give me an insight into actually how is my body functioning? Because I might be feeling like I'm doing okay or not or anything. And my result was pretty good anyway. But it just also gave me that insight, and also where I could improve a little bit more so that I could feel better overall as well. And also be aware of certain spaces that they're a little bit under par, and I can do these things to pick it up.
Yeah. And obviously, you're a lot of practitioners, dream clients, Chrissy, in the sense you just came for optimization. Usually that's not the case. People are coming because they have some kind of problem. And, but, often it's just more fun to work with people with optimization for some people. But, medical doctors are the opposite. They only want to see if you're dying or close to dying, usually. Where there's a lot of other practitioners like functional medicine and nutritionists, whatever. I guess our favorites are the people who are not really, really struggling, but the people who really want to optimize it. Of course, we want to help everyone. But that's relatively unusual. A lot of people usually come because they have some kind of issue. And of course, when we go through a few examples today, we're just going to be talking about the nutrients. But of course, when you're actually dealing with people, you're looking at everything through the lens of what their problem is, what they've actually come for. But of course, it goes both ways. So in this case, I think we did it in the previous episode. In this case, I won't say this person had this problem and therefore We'll just look at it purely in terms of the nutrients, but we'll also say, for instance, this person has this nutrient deficiency, they're likely to have this problem, or they're likely to have these symptoms. So we will do a little bit of that. So why am I a fan of the NutrEval? It's very complete. I just gave a few examples of things that it doesn't contain, but it contains really the vast majority of nutrients, not just vitamins and minerals, but also amino acids, which are very important, we talked about last time, and also all the essential fats and the ratio between them, which is also very interesting. And if we have time, we'll get to that as well. And of course, it doesn't just tell you that, it tells you how the body's handling toxicity. So we might look at that aspect of it when we do our toxicity episode. And it tells you how the body, the level of certain toxins, especially the 4 main heavy metals. And that was obviously for me the most helpful thing of doing the NutrEval. I say obviously, if you've watched a bunch of our episodes before, I've talked about that a lot. So let's look. This is not the first page of NutrEval, but this is the first page that I would look at from the perspective of nutrition. So in this case, we're looking at mine, and because we're looking at this widescreen, I guess we're seeing 2 pages at once, but I think that's okay, right? People can still read that.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. So I can zoom in, but yeah. Okay. Right. Well, we can see that it gives the level of various antioxidants. It does include a couple of nutrients here that we haven't talked about, so I'll talk about those in a sec. Then it gives the B vitamins, a few of the main minerals, omega-3. So this is more like an overview, and then through following pages it gives more in-depth information about each of those. So this is the overview page, and so one of the good things about NutrEval is it is not hard to decipher, and a person can look at this and pretty much work out for themselves what they should be doing to some degree, although it's not perfect, obviously. And it is better to have a practitioner interpret it with you.
Absolutely. And of course, for those that aren't on visual, what we're looking at here on this nutrient needs page is there's a green section, a yellow section, and a red section. And then those, according to those specific antioxidants, B vitamins, or whatever is listed, it's showing you a marker, whether it's in the green, the yellow, or the red, which is identifying where you might need to have additional support.
Yes. Yeah. People have asked me, what is it basing its vitamin A on? I have looked through all their literature on this test and I cannot find anything. I can't remember if you said you had managed to find something, Chrissy, or
No,
no.
I hadn't.
So I have no idea what they base that on. It might just be the general need for antioxidant support. If so, that would be a bit weak because obviously the evidence for vitamin A being an antioxidant is a little bit weak. But whatever. So I ignore the vitamin A. But for most of the rest, it is clear what it's based on. So CoQ10, glutathione, they just actually test the level in the blood. We'll get to that section. Oh, and alpha lipoic acid. The B vitamins are all based on specific organic acids markers in the urine. The magnesium, manganese, and zinc are based on actual blood tests again. The omega-3 is based on actual blood tests. The need for, I'll skip that because we're doing nutrients. And then the vitamin D is based on actual blood tests. And then the amino acids recommendations are based on urine again. I'm generally more of a fan of blood than urine, and specific type of blood as well. So depending on what it is. So for instance, we'll get to it, but I just said that the level of magnesium in the blood is not very helpful, right? A minute ago. So why is this? Well, it's because they're testing the red blood cell. So they're actually looking at the cellular reserves of the mineral, not just looking at how much of the mineral is floating around in the blood. That's why. But maybe we'll get into more detail about that. Now, in case of amino acids are similar to the electrolytes in that the body tends to keep them within a tight range within the blood. And so for that reason, the urine is a better indication of the store of those amino acids, because if the body is excreting a very low amount or none compared to all the other amino acids, that tells us that it is likely to have a lower storage of those. Does that make sense? Awesome. So we'll just look at a couple of people's and then we'll look at the more granular pages. So we can see this was me when I first was really struggling with my health back in 2021, but also doing a lot of things for my health, taking a lot of supplements and stuff. And so if I look at this, just from a nutrient point of view, the main thing that I see here is a person who's highly stressed. And a little bit of toxicity stress as well shows up. So what am I basing that on?
And what are you looking at to, oh yeah, exactly. I was going to say, what are you looking at to give you those indications?
Mainly that high need of at least one of the B vitamins there. We could also say maybe because of the specific needs of B vitamins, like the fact that it is B2, B3, and B6, that it's maybe a methylation issue as well, but there are other markers for that later, and we'll probably talk about methylation more when we talk about toxins. But stress is definitely one of the things, and then but it's the fact that there's the magnesium there as well, that significantly increased need for magnesium. My magnesium here is in the red, and it's advising I take double the normal recommended intake, and so that is kind of classic stress when a person has that need for magnesium as well. Plus, when I then look at the amino acids, it's showing an increased need for isoleucine, increased need for lysine, and increased need for tyrosine, mainly. Now, isoleucine is kind of, shorthand, I'd say, is for energy and for muscle. Lysine, shorthand, is for immunity. And then tyrosine, shorthand, it's for energy and focus. So again, it's like another, stress thing, potentially. Stress stroke lack of energy is the main thing that I see shining through on this person's results. So if we look at another one, so this person, as I say, I don't really know what that vitamin A is based on, so I just ignore that. But if I look at the rest of it, they have more of a need for antioxidant support. So I think there's a bit more of a case of oxidative stress going on there. Also very high level requirements of several of the B vitamins there. And so again, with this person, I would expect stress, but you see how the B1 and the B7 are also kind of mid-range range. So then I'd say this person also has some degree of fatigue. because those
Yeah, 5 out
nutrients,
of 7. That's a lot.
yeah, those nutrients, especially vitamin. I mean, all the B vitamins are involved in energy production, but especially B1, B3, and B7 are like the most crucially involved. So when a person has enhanced needs for all three, I would think, yeah, this person's also going to be low in energy. And then just to support it again, if we go back, we can see magnesium, elevated need for magnesium as well. And then an increased need for vitamin D, which indicates that the person is probably not getting sun and not supplementing, and then perhaps that they have some kind of immune system. I wouldn't be hugely surprised if they had a little bit of weakened immunity or something like that, but I don't see any other markers for it specifically here. The only one I might see is elevated lysine, so that would just be a guess. But again, I'd say fatigue, stress, and then maybe a little bit of excess toxicity would be the three things like I'd pick up on there, just on the first page, right? Just on the overview. For the next person, main thing here again would be stress, based on those B vitamins again. Very common, as I say, to have those B vitamins, but this person had very high score for one of the B vitamins. I think, riboflavin, 10 out of 10. So extremely depleted in riboflavin, which, I'd correlate that once again to stress and energy. The fact that the magnesium is, not super depleted might indicate actually, potentially even more of an energy issue than a stress issue, and maybe a methylation issue as well. Might be a factor, especially as well because the increased need for alpha lipoic acid and a little bit of increased need for CoQ10, maybe a little bit of oxidative damage going on there. And then so in this case you can see there's a bunch of different amino acids that are listed there, but you can see it's none of the figures are anywhere near as high as the first person. So in that case, I'd say rather than a kind of rather than a specific issue of, like if someone has really increased need for tyrosine and, energy focus, really increased need for lysine and, immune, whatever. This person is more like just deficient in protein is how I would say. But more specifically, of course, deficient in amino acids. And so then either they're not eating enough protein, or their stomach acid is not able to break down the protein, which is very common, or maybe their intestines are so inflamed or irritated or something that they're not able to assimilate the protein. But protein is more of a stomach issue than an intestine issue. So it's going to be one of those two things in the majority of cases. And of course, if a person has very high stress, they tend to have an issue of maybe not producing enough stomach acid. And so that would be like a preliminary guess.
That's really good. I hadn't heard that before. So, okay, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is that, those not being able to break that down is more of a stomach acid issue.
Potentially, or they're not eating enough.
Potentially. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people don't eat enough protein as well. So that's another potential issue. Yeah. But one of the two in most cases. Absolutely. And then this last person here, so we can see elevated need for vitamin C, alpha lipoic acid, CoQ10, and glutathione. So it's quite a lot of antioxidants, increased need. So again, signs of increased oxidative damage. There could be many reasons for that. But if the person, if we don't see many toxins later on, for instance, then maybe it's just like a sign of a high omega-6s. And so the NutrEval actually tells us the person's omega-6 status, so we can see if that's the case, if that could be what's going on. And then, very high needs for several of the B vitamins. Again, different ones a little bit here from most of the others. Although riboflavin's high, I think, with everyone. The high needs with pretty much everyone. But just again, a person who is stressed and needs some antioxidant support. It's pretty common. The magnesium is kind of, mid-range high here, like the need for more magnesium. Now, if you're starting to listen to this and go, oh, these tests, they just tell you the same thing every time. Well, let's just go back for a second. So if we think about what these days is becoming the dominant paradigm as to what the root cause is of chronic disease, what are we hearing these days, Chrissy? I don't know, you might be hearing something different from me, but the words that I keep hearing are metabolic dysfunction
correct,
and mitochondrial dysfunction, right?
100%.
Yeah, metabolic dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction. So what is that? That is obviously caused by a bunch of different things, which is why we have the Rejuvenate blueprint. But basically, when you have it, one of the consequences is an increased level of oxidative damage, which is where people then get these test results that show, for instance, increased need for antioxidants, and it stresses the body. Like, there are different types of stress, right? Obviously, there's the stress of I'm always working, there's always drama in my life, I'm always traveling, whatever, these kind of things. But there's also, I've always got an infection stress. My body's dealing with a load of toxin stress. My body's got some kind of hormonal imbalance stress, right? So there's various things that can stress you. But whatever's stressing you, it then, I'm taking loads of drugs. But whatever's stressing you increases your need for different nutrients, especially B vitamins. And so that's why we commonly see that need for B vitamins. We commonly see that oxidative stress. We commonly see magnesium depletion. And then we quite commonly, though not as commonly, like this person doesn't have it, see where a person then, for instance, has digestive issues, like in this person, it didn't show up, but in the other person I said, it kind of showed that they perhaps have like a dysbiosis, like this person, or the other person, it kind of showed that they're low in loads of amino acids, which might indicate like a stomach acid, like different things like that.
Right. Yeah, these tests are very helpful. But going back to your point of somebody saying, "Oh, well, they're just telling you the same thing," it's like, but what we are seeing is there's a lot of commonalities, but they are presenting differently in individuals and from a space of deficiencies. These are things that we can assist somebody to help bring their levels back up to, to more towards optimal, so that the downstream effect, which is either fatigue, or for somebody else, it might be, more dysbiosis, or it might be something in all these different ways. Because like you said, in the past, when we've talked about things, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And again, going down to genetics, everybody's blueprint is different. So even though they might be showing the same sort of deficiency, it can be showing up as different things. And I think that's where it can also get kind of confusing for everybody and be like, oh, we don't know what to do with it, going back to the overwhelming space before. But then hence why we're doing this for a practitioner, because the practitioner has that understanding and can guide individuals in the right direction of where they need to go.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, even if a person has exactly the same deficiencies, it can show up in different ways based on, genetic and environmental factors. And then which deficiencies show up will also vary based on genetic and environmental factors, but there will be commonalities, like we said, and like we can see in these 4 examples, there are a lot of commonalities. Increased need for B vitamins is one. Low levels of magnesium is pretty common. Low levels of some of the antioxidants, like endogenous, like glutathione, and exogenous, like vitamin C, all pretty common. And then we can see, so this is kind of the next relevant page when it comes to nutrition. And so we'll ignore a lot of this because this is not a NutrEval guide and it could take a vast amount of time, but I'll just focus on the stuff that's relevant to deficiencies. So you can see here, if you see my screen, on the kind of top right of the left page, we can see vitamin markers. And so it's explaining here that these specific organic acids in the urine are the things that it's basing some of these estimations of increased need on. Now, this is not a perfect science, and honestly, a lot of MDs are taught to just dismiss this. I would say, though, that the reason why it's quite popular and it's caught on is because clinically it is actually accurate and helpful, meaning that when people heed this advice and take it on, they feel better. Like, and these markers go down, right? So if it were just a bunch of nonsense, then first of all, if people follow the advice, it wouldn't be helpful. And second of all, if people follow the advice, it wouldn't change the markers in any kind of coherent way, right? But neither of those things are actually the case. So obviously, you know, some medical doctors do use this system, and Dr. Miriam, who we have on frequently, certainly is very well versed in this. But you know, I'm just saying, if you show this to a normal MD, they will be dismissive of it. But then again, as we said, a normal MD has had almost no training in nutrition. So, you know, I guess that's part of the course. You know, no test is 100% accurate and reliable, unfortunately, when it comes to any of this kind of stuff. This just happens to be the best overall in terms of value and accuracy that I found. I have tried others, like, for instance, you know, this, as it says here, this is one of the things that the need for B1, B2, and B3 is based on. When I first did mine, I also tested B1, B2, and B3 with the most accurate and expensive tests for each of those. And they didn't show like the exact same level of need, but they were pretty similar, pretty equivalent. So, you know, that satisfied me as an example, right? And I know most people, most practitioners even, will not be doing multiple different tests with different companies for exactly the same markers for patients, because, you know, it's like a waste of money. But I've done quite a few of those experiments. I would say in the elements of nutrition, there is a very impressive conformity between different labs and different types of tests, like this case, organic acids versus, you know, a blood test. Like, it's pretty uniformly accurate. The only type of blood test commonly ordered by alternative health practitioner, for want of a better word, you know, your functional medicine doctor or whatever, that I think is completely inaccurate is, unfortunately, is like the food intolerances. Because when I have sent exactly the same blood to completely different labs, they give completely different results. There's very little uniformity there. But with nutrients, I find it to be consistent and largely consistent and accurate.
Okay. And so then looking at this, for in specific within nutrients, and you were talking about the vitamin markers, I can also see over here the cellular energy and mitochondrial markers, the fatty acids, the carbohydrates, and things like that. So is that more speaking towards our body's ability to break down, you know, our fats, our proteins, and our carbs?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in fact, we should probably look at the image before for that, which I think we looked at before in an episode on energy. So I'd say it's not as reliable, but it gives an indication of the utilization of fats and carbs specifically. And it probably tells you if you're having too much of one or the other in terms of like your body can't handle it. So let's see if we can find a better example than this. And I'm really just focusing more on the top section for that, because as you can see, you know, whether fat, carb, or protein, you know, and this is very much simplified, I admit, but the body will turn it into something, acetyl-CoA, before it goes into that Krebs cycle. So we can kind of ignore the Krebs cycle for now and just look at the top bit. So in this case of this person, for instance, you can see they metabolizing carbohydrates and fats as energy pretty well. The only one that's not green there is adipic acid, showing a little bit of excess of that. So maybe they're having a little bit more fat than they can convert via beta oxidation into the first stage of energy, but really not much of a problem. If we look at another person, we can see this person, like, both of those markers are raised, one of them substantially. So that indicates that they're not able to utilize the level of fat that they're consuming as well, because there's more being turned into these byproducts that you don't really want high. And so what could cause that? Well, this is the same person who had that 10 out of 10 need for vitamin B2. And we can see, so this is one of the other reasons that this algorithm has decided this person needs B2, because it is postulating that one of the reasons why these fatty acids, so much of them are turning into these byproducts and not going into the energy creation cycle, is because there's a lack of these cofactors, which you can see written in small letters here with a little green arrow, Mg and B2. And so I think the person's magnesium was not that low in their blood. So it's saying it's probably B2, a lack of B2, which is causing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, that was also what I liked about seeing this. And for those of you, we are on page, where the Krebs cycle is on the NutrEval, and it just goes to show you those cofactors that are required for the processes, which is like, yeah, that really helped me see, oh, actually, I had no idea that that's what those were, and those were involved in those processes. So it was a little bit of a not wake up, but how can I say? It's just like, a light bulb went off of, these are so very important, because if I don't have that vitamin or that nutrient or mineral, then this process cannot take place.
Yes. Well, yeah. And I mean, if it didn't take place, you drop dead. That's the kind of
Right.
mainstream
Yeah,
MD.
extreme.
That's the mainstream MD dismissal of all of this. But of course, it's not as simple as black and white, right? Like what you
No,
said
it's
is
not.
correct. So yeah, I wanted to pick another example here, just someone where the marker at the top here was low rather than high. So you can see with this person, they have a low level of pyruvate or pyruvic acid. And so the tempting conclusion to make on that, if we just look at this and take it at face value, is that it's lack of magnesium again, because it's showing that's the one cofactor that's required to convert the carbohydrates to pyruvate. Now, first of all, that's not quite true. There is more to it than just magnesium. And then second of all, there's another reason why this could be the case. And it could also just be that a person is not consuming many carbohydrates. So if a person's on a ketogenic diet, for instance, then they will have a picture like this. You see where the pyruvate is low, but then you see where it says next to ketogenesis that the beta butyric acid is high. So that's common when someone is fasting or ketogenic, and so that's why we can't always draw those simple conclusions, and that's why I think the NutrEval is quite good. That like its evaluation of how much magnesium you need is based on a lot of these different factors. Like it's putting it all together, and it's not perfect by any means, but it does a pretty good job of like working that all out. And you can see with this person, even though they've got like reasonable levels of coenzyme Q10 and glutathione, their lipid peroxides are still high, which means that too much of their fats are being oxidized, or damaged, rusted. And so that could be where a person needs maybe some more antioxidants, even if they're already okay with their level of antioxidants, because that's still happening, if that makes sense. So it's not always quite as simple as it looks on face value. I guess that's the point I wanted to make. And you can see that's why this person, even though they haven't been recommended large amounts of glutathione or anything, because they already got it, they've been recommended to have like high amounts of vitamin E and plant-based antioxidants to kind of neutralize that high levels of lipid peroxides, if that makes sense. So it's a complicated calculation it's making. I guess that's the bottom line of it. So we can see on this page that there's actually two blood markers, so glutathione from whole blood, and then coenzyme Q10 from serum. Different people have different opinions on how valid that is. I know like glutathione, there's reduced and not reduced, and it's only going to pick up one of those types. So I know when Dr. Miriam was on, for instance, she said she doesn't pay too much attention to that on its own, although obviously if a person does have lipid peroxides or high levels of this one here, 8-OHDG, then that could be still a sign that the person needs antioxidant support. So I wouldn't put too much focus on those on their own for that reason. What I do like to look at, so if we look at the next page, the amino acids. Obviously, we really looked at the recommendations on the overview page, but you can see this is what it's actually based on, and you can see it gets much more granular. It basically shows what the levels are, and the other thing we have to remember is that these are reference ranges, not optimal ranges. So we don't actually know what the optimal level is of arginine, for instance, in the urine. All we know is what's typical, and so. And I say that, for example, because with, say, glycine, generally people's diets are quite deficient in like glycine and proline, for instance, these days, because those are generally found in connective tissue of animals, which a lot of people don't eat these days.
Right.
So if a person has like an elevated need for glycine in their test results, I would say that's an especially good indicator that they really need it, because even the average person is probably quite low in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So I always use that like a little bit as well as another factor to consider. So you can see this person, their glycine is right at the bottom end of the reference range. You might say, well, it's barely in the yellow. Is that such a big deal? But I would say, yes, get them to take some glycine. First of all, glycine is, very safe, even at high doses. Tastes good, right? There's really no downsides to glycine. You can have over 10 grams, without any problem, and because that's the amount naturally found in food easily if a person eats like a ancestral diet, and probably most people are actually deficient, so that probably should really be read in terms of an optimal range. So there are all these kind of subtleties and nuances that are hard to know, and as a lay person, but which I would say as a practitioner, it's good. Like once you decide that this is, whichever test you go for, maybe you don't like this one, maybe it's a different one, but whichever one you do like, I would say then it's important to really learn about every single marker, what they base it on, and get really granular with it, basically.
Great. Yeah, and it's a good overview for sure, and it helps give, just kind of see what's going on and where there's more support can be brought into the picture.
Yes. So we'll do the essential fats really quickly. I know we want to try and keep these episodes reasonably short. So you can see it goes into a tremendous amount of detail about the essential fats, way more than any test I've seen other than a very expensive fatty acid only panel. And I can't remember if that had any more than this. So it tells you a lot. But the main things that you probably want to be paying attention to are the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6s, and then the ratio as well of conversion of LA to GLA and arachidonic acid, and then probably the level of EPA and DHA as well. So, and a lot of those are kind of shown here right at the bottom right. So you can see under cardiovascular risk here on the bottom right, it's got like ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. Now again, these are reference ranges. So this person has a ratio of 3.6 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3. That's at the low end of the range, but anyone who's really studied this knows that's not a bad thing. That's good. Like 3 to 1, maybe even 2 to 1, 1 to 1 is fine. So that's good, that result. AA to EPA, so AA, arachidonic acid, is like an inflammatory metabolite of omega-6. It's one of the problematic ones. So again, the fact this person is very low is good, and I would not worry at all that it's in the red. And then lastly, the omega-6 index. What's that? I can't remember that one. But yeah, those are the main two I pay attention to. And then I also pay attention to that conversion to GLA, because GLA is like the good omega-6. It's an anti-inflammatory omega-6. And so if we look at this next page, we can see, so it shows the conversion of one to another, to another, to another.
Right.
And we can see this person's doing pretty well. So they're converting a lot more than the average person to GLA, which is the good type. And then they're converting less than the average person into arachidonic acid, which is the bad type. So even though both of those are in the red, I would consider both of those two not to be a problem. And in fact, to be a good thing, which is a little bit confusing for the layperson looking at it, but you can kind of reassure people on that. I'm also interested actually in the odd chain fatty acids, because there's research showing that those are quite beneficial. That's close to the bottom left here, the ones that say pentadecanoic and margaric, 15 to 0 and 17 to 0. This person's a medium to low compared to average. So we generally want those really high. If it's on the red end of high, I'm happy with that. And generally, people eat a lot of fish or a lot of dairy, it is high. I see that almost universally. So that's a good thing. And yeah, like that omega-6, the idea that it's bad for that person because it's low, all my repeat fans can have a good laugh at that as a concept.
Yeah.
Certainly not something that I would actually worry about. So we've got to remember, again, as I said a few minutes ago, these are based on reference ranges of normal people in the 21st century, not of optimal people. Of course, in the 21st century, we are, in the last 100 years, our intake of omega-6 has gone from 1% of calories to 30% of calories. There is a correlation, even if not direct causation, with the chronic disease epidemic. And so, of course, if a person's is lower, that's not a problem. I would say with a high degree of confidence. I really wouldn't worry about it.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Elwin Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. Right. Brilliant. I mean, gosh, again, a lot of information to take in. And I know we're looking at it from a practitioner, but we're going into it on a deeper level here. But if a practitioner was to get these results back, they would do a scan, look at it, and really be able to garner a lot of information so that when they do meet with the client, they have a very good idea of what's going on internally.
Okay, so the last page that I would look at from a nutritional point of view is the elemental markers. And so we can see that on the right here. And so we can see, this was me when I first started.
It's a dead giveaway with that lead.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll discuss that in the toxin episode. But that's... and of course, that can dysregulate and mess with everything, right? And in fact, it did. But so we can see, low-ish copper. Does that mean a person needs to supplement with it? That's a bit of a disputed one, right? As to whether, because again, these are based on reference ranges, not optimal, and too much copper is as bad as too little. So we had Dr. Smith on here a couple of months ago making a very strong case for why someone who had blood levels at that level is totally fine. So that's a judgment call for you as a practitioner. But the rest of these I think are pretty uncontroversial. So red blood cell magnesium, again, these are reference ranges, so possibly that green should be even more to the right. But when the person is like low end of normal, which is probably low, then that's low. They definitely need more magnesium. And so, that's why I had here manganese. This is right in the middle. Generally, I've talked to various practitioners about this, including Dr. Miriam. She says she's not worried about manganese, even if it's at the low end. But that's a judgment call again. But because manganese is something that's not great if it's too high as well. It's a little bit toxic, just like copper. Potassium being low here. All right, so we haven't mentioned potassium up until now, but this is a really, really crucial figure. I think I said in the last episode that some people, I see again and again the claim. I have not seen the study that or whatever it's based on, but like 99% of people are deficient in potassium. So I don't know about that, but I do know that where the person has significantly low levels of magnesium and potassium, these are really classic signs of stress. So what happens is when a person is in a strongly sympathetic state, they will hold on to sodium and they will excrete a lot of potassium and magnesium. So when adrenaline and cortisol are high, basically. So yeah, with both of these being low, this is a definite indicator of stress, meaning that sympathetic function is high, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol tend to be high. When that's the case, the body will tend to hold on to sodium and it will excrete a lot of magnesium and potassium. Now, if a person's very stressed for a long time and they go into something that's often referred to like adrenal fatigue, where the cortisol actually goes low, then sometimes it is the opposite. Then they will excrete sodium, they'll hold on to potassium. So this is stress, like a picture of stress, but it is a sympathetic type of stress. I would expect the person's cortisol to be high as well. And a person can be helped with that by consuming more magnesium and consuming more potassium, but it's really not a resolution because it's the problem is that the body's excreting it as fast as you can get it in. So this is, a case where you really have to get the person's hormones in balance as well, which obviously we're going to tackle in a different part of this series. But that's a strong clue about that with this person, which was me. And I was in a very stressed state at the time, constantly panicking about my health. And, with this really high lead, it's not that much of a surprise. And so my potassium now, I think when I last tested it, was the first time it was in the green level. And actually it was a combination of supplementing potassium in the form of potassium chloride, just adding it to meals, and then getting my hormones into balance, and that finally managed to restore my potassium. I actually found it a lot easier to get my magnesium up than my potassium, which I guess adds a bit of credibility to this idea that even more people are depleted in potassium than are magnesium. Having this level of selenium low is not good in general. So selenium's important for loads of things, but some of the highlights are thyroid function and heavy metal detoxification. And of course, heavy metal detoxification is something I very much needed. And so this would be a case where I would strongly try and get this person's selenium up. And this level of zinc, right in the middle of the reference range. Again, these are reference ranges, not optimal ranges. So if we say, a lot of people maybe are low in zinc, as a lot of people say in the nutrition community, then we could say maybe it could still do it being higher, especially as I was dealing with, heavy metal toxicity, which zinc is useful for. And then, you can see the person's vitamin D results as well below there. So that's something that we've really discussed. We can just look at a couple of other people's nutritional elements. Oh yeah, just before we do that, the point I want to make is the fact that the potassium and the magnesium, see it says RBC there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that means red blood cell. That means it's based on cellular levels, not blood levels.
Okay. So
that's the crucial distinction, because if it was just blood levels, it's always within a tight range, except for an emergency, like we were talking about. So here's another example here. You can see again, this person was low in magnesium and potassium, low within the reference range, probably lower compared to optimal. And so again, there's that pattern of stress, like we talked about. Otherwise they have a reasonable amount of zinc and copper in balance, and selenium. Probably wouldn't supplement a person of any of those in that case, but maybe advise foods that are higher to get them closer to the top of the reference range.
Yeah, which I think we're going to look at in our next, in part 3 of this, of looking at the Chronometer app, just so we can make sure that people are, when they are eating, they are getting the recommended, or the certain percents in their diet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This person, which is you, Chrissy, still low with magnesium, potassium, but not as much, we can see there. So it's within the green range. And so we can see the elevated need for magnesium that it recommended for you was based on other factors rather than just the blood, because otherwise it would say you're probably fine. So yeah, not as depleted as the other two people we looked at so far. The only thing that is, but still, like, not, still a sign of some stress, still a sign of, maybe increasing magnesium, potassium, certainly not doing any harm. The main concerning thing I would say that I'd see here is this ratio of copper to zinc. The ratio of copper to zinc is high, which is not good. I think we've done a whole episode on that before, so I won't explain why.
Yes.
But yeah, that would be something I focus on. I would say to the person, definitely stop supplementing copper if you are, and consider supplementing zinc to restore the balance there. Unless the person is eating very low zinc diet and agrees to shift it to a very high zinc diet, maybe then you could do it with diet. But supplementation would be something to consider.
Beautiful. This is, a great overview. Is there anything else that we're going to look at in the NutrEval? I know we're probably coming up to time soon. I want to make sure we cover everything in this part 2 of deficiencies.
No, I'll just draw people's attention to the fact that you can see near the bottom here that they've got a link to the NutrEval guide. So there's like a several 100-page document that goes through each of these different markers in detail. Not crazy detail, but maybe, quarter of a page, half a page for each one, something like that. I definitely recommend people click on that and read that and familiarize themselves with it if they're going to be using this test with clients, so that they, thoroughly understand what it's based on, which would include its limitations, right? As we said, this is not perfect. It just happens to be the best that I found so far. And then I think there is a course which goes into more detail about it, which you'd recommend, Chrissy?
Yes, definitely through the Kalish Institute. That was great. He does deep dives into the NutrEval, so it's been absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's great to learn a little bit more about it, and I cannot recommend it enough.
The other thing that makes me like the NutrEval and give it credibility, other than just that clinically it's helpful, like when people follow its advice they feel better and stuff like that, is the correlation that I see between the NutrEval results and people's genetic results. It's not a one-to-one correlation. It's not like every single thing the NutrEval says that the person needs is what the genetics say it needs, because of course, people's needs will change over their lifetime, depending on lifestyle and diet and all the rest of it. But it's way beyond random probability, right? It's statistically significant how often there is an agreement between what a NutrEval says you need more of and what your genetic reports say you need more of. So that's the other reason that I give a lot of credibility to the NutrEval, is because I see that correlation. And in fact, I am hoping to publish at some point a study that talks about that and gives enough examples of this statistically significant correlation that really proves that point, that genetics are a significant factor.
I'm looking forward to that. That'll be great, Elwin. That would be really, really great. This has been highly comprehensive, and I know we're carrying on with the series, and so thank you for this. It's really insightful, and I know this is meant to be for practitioners, but also for those that aren't, especially if you're somebody like me who just wants to dive deep and get as much information as possible, because I love to understand really where everything's coming from. So thank you. This is really good. And we're going to carry on for part 3 of step 2, deficiencies, correct?
Yeah, for anyone who thinks that this is all like supplement sales or something, absolutely not. Sometimes supplements are necessary, and sometimes supplements are not necessary, but they're helpful. Like sometimes having more than an absolute need will help, like having high doses of something, B1 or B7 or magnesium or whatever, will kickstart a certain process and improve it, molybdenum. But a lot of the time, the basic problem is that people are not getting enough from food. And a lot of the time, just like hopefully this episode has been a thorough example of how specific advice is better than generic advice in terms of seeing people's deficiencies and nutrient needs. We're going to do that next episode for giving specific advice versus generic advice for nutritional in terms of dietary intake, rather than just eat a healthy, balanced diet, everything in moderation, eat the rainbow, all these slogans. We're going to look at, okay, well, what about reality, right? And hopefully we'll give some examples of how to help someone build a diet for themselves that is actually genuinely nutritious and meeting their needs, and is not empty calories, obviously, which I guess, that's not too hard to show people how to do that, but contains a balance of the nutrients that they need in order to be optimal, which is actually harder than you'd think if you're following generic advice, but actually very easy once you know a few things, which is what I'll share with you in the next episode.
Well said. So everybody stay tuned. Please make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and that bell icon so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you for part 3.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.